Undercover millionaire CEO buys a sandwich. The waitress's warning note makes him act instantly. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, back to our main character. Alexander Pierce, CEO of a massive tech empire, was no stranger to power. He thrived in the world of high-stakes deals, multi-million-dollar investments, and boardroom battles. With a platinum card in his wallet and a sharp, calculating mind, he was a man who never had to wait for anything. Not for dinner, not for a deal, and certainly not for respect. But tonight, things were different. He walked into a small, unassuming diner, dressed in a simple, yet expensive suit, looking out of place among the modest decor. The neon lights buzzed softly above, and the scent of grilled sandwiches filled the air. The clatter of silverware on plates and the quiet murmur of the other customers created an atmosphere far removed from the corporate boardrooms he was used to. Alexander didn't want to be here. This was the result of a bet, a favor from a friend who thought he needed to get out more. He hated surprises, and he hated the idea of being seen as just another rich guy. So, he decided to play it cool. He ordered a sandwich, something simple, just to get through the evening. He wasn't here for conversation. But then, something unexpected happened. The waitress, Emily Davis, approached his table with a practiced smile. She was a young woman, with dark brown hair tied back into a neat ponytail, wearing the standard black apron and white shirt. But something about her eyes caught his attention. There was an intelligence in them, a quiet strength. "Good evening," she said, setting down a glass of water. "Would you like to start with a drink while you wait?" Alexander barely looked up from his phone. "I'm waiting for someone. Just the sandwich for now." Emily nodded, unfazed by his dismissal, and turned to leave. Alexander had almost forgotten she was there. When she returned, delivering his sandwich with a small side of fries. She placed the food in front of him, but instead of leaving, she stood there for a moment, her expression shifting slightly. "Is there anything else I can get you, sir?" she asked. He looked up, finally annoyed. "No, I'm fine." But then, Emily slid a small piece of paper onto the table. "A warning for you," she said quietly, before turning to walk away. He stared at the note. Written in neat handwriting was a simple message. Asterisk, "The world doesn't care about your money, but the people around you do. Watch your back." Asterisk. Alexander furrowed his brow. What was this? A joke? He quickly stuffed the note into his pocket, unsure of what to make of it. But as he took a bite of his sandwich, something in the back of his mind nagged at him. Why had she given him that note? It was unusual, especially from someone like her. Someone who likely had no idea who he was or what he did. Alexander tried to push the thought away and focus on his meal, but it lingered. Who was this woman? Why had she chosen to speak up? Emily wasn't like the others he encountered in his world, where money and status meant everything. She was different. He felt an odd sense of respect for her, though he couldn't understand why. Something in her demeanor had gotten under his skin. It wasn't just the note. It was the way she carried herself, the way she looked at him, not with awe or fear, but with a kind of detached understanding. She seemed to see through him, to see beyond the layers of power and wealth that he had built around himself. As the evening wore on, Alexander found himself growing increasingly curious about Emily. Who was she, really? What did she know that he didn't? And why had she written that note? There was more to her than met the eye. Little did he know, that simple warning would change the course of his evening, and his life. Alexander sat there, staring at the note Emily had left him. He felt an odd tightness in his chest, something unfamiliar, like the knot that forms when you're forced to confront a truth you've been avoiding. He had always prided himself on control over his business, his time, his surroundings. But this was different. This waitress, this seemingly insignificant person in his life, had given him a glimpse of something he had never considered before. It wasn't just the words on the note, it was her. He had underestimated her. And now, it was impossible to stop thinking about her. Emily moved effortlessly through the diner, attending to customers with a calm that Alexander found strangely captivating. Her movements were confident, yet her face held a quiet reserve. He couldn't help but watch her as she worked. She wasn't like the women he was used to, those who were eager to impress him with their charm or beauty. No, Emily had a quiet dignity that didn't ask for attention, but somehow commanded it. Alexander finished his sandwich, but his mind was far from the meal. He was too distracted by her, too drawn in by the subtle power she exuded. He couldn't help himself. He stood up and walked over to the counter where she was wiping down the surface, her back turned to him. "Excuse me," he said, his voice low, but there was a firmness to it. Emily turned, and for the first time since their initial encounter, their eyes locked. There was a moment of silence between them, a quiet tension that neither of them spoke about, but both felt. "Yes?" she asked, her tone professional, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, something that told him she already knew what he was going to say. "I've been thinking," Alexander began, his words careful, as if testing the waters, "about the note you left me." She didn't flinch. She simply waited, her expression unreadable. "It was a warning," she said simply, as though it was the most natural thing in the world. "I've seen enough to know when someone is living in a bubble." Alexander paused, taken aback by her bluntness. "A bubble?" he repeated, almost incredulously. "Yeah," she said, nodding slightly. "You're used to everything going your way. Money can buy you anything. But not everything can be bought. Not real respect. Not real connection." Alexander felt a flicker of irritation, but it was quickly replaced with curiosity. He had been told many things about himself, but no one had ever spoken to him like this. He had always been the one in control, the one who dictated the rules. But Emily didn't play by those rules. She spoke as if she had nothing to prove, nothing to gain. And that intrigued him more than anything. "And what exactly do you think you know about me?" he asked, his voice softer now, almost as if he were testing her once more. Emily's gaze never wavered. "I know that you're lonely," she said quietly. "I know that you hide behind your wealth, your success. But underneath it all, there's something missing." Her words hit him harder than he expected. He felt a strange sting in his chest, but he quickly brushed it off. "I'm fine," he said, but even he didn't believe it. "You don't have to be fine," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "It's okay not to be okay." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, Alexander didn't know how to respond. He had spent so long building an image, a reputation, that he had forgotten what it meant to simply be human. Emily's honesty was both a challenge and a comfort, something he wasn't used to. He realized, in that moment, that he didn't want to walk away from this conversation. There was something about her, something that made him feel alive in a way he hadn't felt in years. "I think I need to hear more," he said, his voice low, but sincere. Emily didn't answer right away. She just smiled softly, a smile that was not condescending, not mocking, but genuine. "You'll hear what you need to hear," she said, "when you're ready." Alexander stood there, staring at her for a long moment, the weight of her words settling over him. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he had all the answers. But something about Emily made him want to find them. Something about her made him want to change. And in that moment, Alexander knew that this encounter was the beginning of something much more than just a simple meal in a diner. It was the start of a new chapter, one where he would have to let go of the power he had relied on for so long and learn to listen, not just to others, but to himself. The next day, Alexander found himself thinking about Emily more than he cared to admit. He had spent the entire evening replaying their conversation in his mind, analyzing her every word. It was strange for him to feel this way. In his world, emotions were a distraction, something to be avoided at all costs. But with Emily, it was different. She had a way of cutting through his armor, forcing him to confront parts of himself he had long ignored. He couldn't quite understand it, but he knew he couldn't just walk away from this. That evening, he returned to the same diner. It was an impulse, but one he couldn't ignore. As he stepped inside, the familiar smell of coffee and grilled sandwiches filled the air. The diner was quieter than the night before, with just a few regulars scattered around. He could feel the eyes of the customers on him, but it didn't bother him as much as it usually did. It was as if, in this place, he didn't have to be the powerful CEO. He could just be himself. Emily was behind the counter, scribbling something on a notepad. She looked up as he walked in, and her face lit up with a small, knowing smile. "Back again?" she asked, her tone casual, but there was a hint of curiosity in her voice. Alexander nodded. his gaze lingering on her for a moment longer than necessary. "I didn't expect to see you here," he said, his voice low. "I figured I'd give this place another try." Emily raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "Another try?" she repeated, as she walked over to his table. "I didn't know it was that bad." Alexander chuckled softly. "It wasn't. I just found myself thinking about our conversation." Emily didn't say anything at first. She just placed the menu in front of him and studied him with those piercing eyes of hers. "You know, most people come in here for the food," she said finally, her tone playful but with an edge. "They don't usually come back for a conversation." "I'm not most people," Alexander said quietly. She nodded, as if she already knew that. "What's different about today?" she asked, folding her arms across her chest. "You seem different." Alexander hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to put his thoughts into words. He wasn't used to being vulnerable, but there was something about Emily that made him want to be. "I've spent a lot of time building a life based on control," he began, his eyes meeting hers. "Business, money, power. I thought those things were all I needed." Emily watched him silently, waiting for him to continue. "But you made me realize that there's more to life than that. More than just making the right moves and getting ahead. I've been so focused on winning, I forgot what it means to truly live." Emily's expression softened, and for the first time, Alexander saw something in her eyes that resembled understanding. "It's not about winning, you know," she said softly. "It's about living with intention. About making connections, not just deals. About being present, not just in the moment, but in your own life." Alexander felt a strange tug in his chest as her words sank in. He had always believed that life was a game to be won, that success was the ultimate prize. But now he wasn't so sure. He felt like he had been living in the shadows of his own ambitions, ignoring the things that truly mattered. "I don't know where to start," he admitted, looking down at the table. Emily smiled gently. "Start by being honest with yourself," she said. "That's the first step." For a moment, they were both silent, the weight of their conversation hanging in the air. Alexander didn't know what would come next, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the right path. He wasn't sure where it would lead, but he knew one thing for sure. He didn't want to face it alone. "What do you do after a realization like that?" he asked, looking up at Emily. "You take the next step," she said simply. "One step at a time." Alexander nodded slowly. He wasn't sure where this journey would take him, but he was beginning to understand that the first step wasn't about achieving more success. It was about finding himself. And for the first time, he didn't feel like he had to do it alone. The days that followed were a strange mix of uncertainty and clarity for Alexander. He found himself returning to the diner more often, not because he wanted to relive the same conversation with Emily, but because he felt a strange pull to this place, to her. It wasn't just the food, although it was better than he expected. It was the conversations, the genuine connection he was starting to crave. The world he had spent years building around himself was slowly starting to crumble, but in its place, something real was emerging. Emily was right, he realized. There was more to life than power and success. He had spent so many years chasing the wrong things. It wasn't until he started listening to Emily, started being honest with himself, that he began to understand what he had been missing. On one of his visits to the diner, Alexander was caught off guard when Emily handed him a coffee without saying a word. She didn't look at him with the same indifference she usually did, but rather with a quiet understanding that left him feeling exposed. He took a deep breath, setting the cup down in front of him. "I've been thinking," he started, unsure of how to continue. Emily glanced up at him, her expression unreadable. "About what?" she asked, her voice steady but gentle. "About you," he said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. She raised an eyebrow, a hint of curiosity in her gaze. "Me?" she asked, clearly surprised. "You don't know it, but you've changed the way I see things. The way I see myself," he continued. "I've spent so much time building an empire, focusing only on success, but I've never stopped to think about what really matters." Emily didn't say anything right away. She simply watched him, her silence encouraging him to go on. "You were right when you said I'm living in a bubble. I've been hiding behind my wealth and power, trying to control everything, but none of that matters. What matters is being present, being real." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I'm not sure what's next, but I don't want to keep pretending anymore." Emily didn't respond immediately. She just placed a napkin on the table in front of him, as if giving him space to think. It's not about what's next, she said finally. It's about what you do right now. You can't change everything overnight, but you can start small. Start by being honest with yourself and the people around you. Alexander nodded slowly, feeling the weight of her words sink in. And what about you? He asked, leaning forward slightly. What about me? She replied, her voice still calm, but with a touch of curiosity. What do you want? Emily smiled softly, her eyes twinkling with a hint of something Alexander couldn't quite place. I want to live a life that's true to me, she said. I want to help people, make a difference. But I don't need $1 million paycheck to do that. I just need to be in the right place, doing what feels right. Alexander felt a sense of admiration for her. She didn't need the same things he did. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone. She had found something he was still searching for. For the first time in a long while, Alexander felt a shift inside him. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew he was no longer defined by the things he thought were important. As he sat there, looking across the table at Emily, he realized that sometimes the simplest things, like a conversation, a moment of honesty, could change everything. He had spent so many years looking for answers in the wrong places, but now, for the first time, he was ready to find them in the right place, with people who cared, with people who understood. Emily wasn't just a waitress. She was a reminder of everything he had been missing. And as he sat there, in the warmth of the small diner, he knew that his life was about to change forever. The days turned into weeks, and Alexander found himself caught in a whirlwind of change. He had been back to the diner a few times, each time with a little more purpose, a little more clarity. Emily's presence had become a constant in his life, something he hadn't realized he needed until he found it. He had spent years building an empire, yet the real foundation he was missing was right in front of him. The ability to be present, to connect, to live in the moment. Every visit to the diner felt like a small step in the right direction, but Alexander still had a long way to go. He had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he was starting to believe that it didn't have to be all about the destination. It was the journey that mattered, the people along the way. Emily had shown him that, though she never said it directly. It was in the way she lived her life, with intention, with heart. It was a lesson that had taken him years to learn, but now that he couldn't ignore it. One evening, as he sat in the booth across from Emily, he felt a shift within himself. He wasn't the man who walked in here weeks ago. He was someone different now, someone more aware of his own shortcomings, more open to change. Emily noticed it too, though she didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Her eyes, always so observant, saw everything. You seem different, she remarked one evening, as she refilled his cup of coffee. Her voice was soft, almost like she was testing him, waiting to see if he would answer truthfully. I am, Alexander said, looking up at her. In a good way, I hope, she added with a slight smile. Yeah, he replied, his voice steady. I've been thinking a lot lately. About everything. About what really matters. Emily didn't say anything, but her eyes sparkled with a hint of approval. She leaned in slightly, as though she was waiting for him to continue. I've spent so much of my life chasing after the wrong things, he said, his voice low. Power, success, all that stuff. I thought it was everything. But it's not. It's not enough. Emily nodded, her expression still calm, but with a slight warmth in her gaze. It's not, she agreed. And you don't have to have it all figured out to make a change. The important thing is that you're willing to try. Alexander smiled at that. He didn't know how it had happened, but in the past few weeks, Emily had become more than just a waitress to him. She was someone who challenged him, who made him think in ways he never had before. And as much as he hated to admit it, she was becoming a part of his world in a way no one else had. He wasn't sure where this was all headed, but for the first time, he wasn't afraid of the unknown. He was ready to face it. I'm ready, he said, more to himself than to Emily. Ready for what? She asked, her voice gentle but knowing. Ready to change, he replied, looking at her with a new kind of determination. Ready to stop pretending I have it all figured out. Ready to actually live, instead of just surviving. Emily smiled then, a real smile, one that reached her eyes. It was the kind of smile that made Alexander feel like he had finally found something he had been searching for, though he hadn't known it until now. That's a good place to start, she said quietly. One step at a time. Alexander nodded. He didn't need all the answers right now. He didn't need everything to be perfect. He just needed to keep moving forward, one step at a time. And with Emily by his side, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't alone in this anymore. The weight of his past, of his carefully constructed identity, no longer felt as heavy. He had something real now, something that couldn't be bought or controlled, and that was enough. For the first time in a long time, Alexander Pierce felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. As the weeks passed, Alexander's visits to the diner became a part of his new routine. He had stopped trying to control every aspect of his life, and instead, he was learning to let go, to experience life in a way he hadn't allowed himself before. He still carried the weight of his responsibilities, but there was a lightness to him now, a shift in his perspective that allowed him to appreciate the small things. Emily remained a steady presence, quietly guiding him without ever demanding anything in return. He found himself thinking about her more and more, not just about the lessons she had taught him, but about who she was beyond the waitress who had somehow managed to turn his world upside down. One evening, as he sat across from her at the diner, he felt the familiar tug in his chest, the sense that there was something important he needed to say, something he had been holding back for far too long. "I don't know if I ever truly thanked you," Alexander said, his voice calm, but with a vulnerability that surprised even him. Emily looked up from her work, her eyes locking with his. There was no judgment in them, no expectation, just a quiet understanding. "For what?" she asked, her voice soft. "For everything," he replied. "For showing me what really matters. For making me realize that there's more to life than just the chase. You've changed the way I see the world." Emily's expression softened, and she gave him a small, genuine smile. "I didn't do anything," she said, almost shyly. "You did all the work. You're the one who decided to make a change." Alexander shook his head. "But you were the one who gave me the push. You made me see that it's okay to not have everything figured out, that I don't have to control everything all the time." Emily didn't say anything for a moment. She simply watched him, as if she were waiting for him to continue. He had always been a man of few words, but now, in her presence, it was easier to speak his truth. "I've spent my whole life chasing something that wasn't real," he said, his voice quieter now. "I thought if I had enough power, enough money, I'd be happy. But I wasn't. I wasn't even close." Emily leaned forward slightly, her eyes full of empathy. "And now?" she asked, her tone gentle but probing. "Now I know that happiness doesn't come from power or money," he replied. "It comes from being present, from connecting with the people around you, from living a life that's true to who you are." There was a long pause, and for a moment, the only sound in the diner was the hum of the refrigerator in the back. "I'm still learning," Alexander added, his voice thoughtful. "But I'm getting there, one step at a time." Emily smiled at him, a smile that felt like a validation, like she was proud of him, even though he hadn't asked for her approval. "You're doing fine," she said softly. "More than fine." Alexander felt a warmth spread through him at her words. He didn't need anyone else's approval, but there was something about hearing it from Emily that made it feel real. As he sat there, in the small, quiet diner, he realized that he had found something far more valuable than any business deal, any acquisition, any amount of money. He had found peace. He had found the ability to be present in his own life, to truly live. And he owed it all to the most unexpected person, Emily Davis, the waitress who had shown him that the most important things in life could not be bought or controlled. The realization was both humbling and freeing. As he looked across the table at Emily, he knew that this was just the beginning. There was still so much he didn't know, so much he still had to learn. But for the first time in years, he wasn't afraid of the unknown. He was ready to face it, one step at a time. Emily had given him that gift, the gift of being able to see life not as a series of challenges to be conquered, but as a journey to be experienced. And that was the greatest lesson of all. As time passed, Alexander found himself more at ease with the changes he had begun to embrace. He was no longer consumed by the need to control every aspect of his life. He had learned, in the quiet corners of the diner and through the casual conversations with Emily, that true happiness was not about what he had, but about how he lived. His visits to the diner had become less about seeking answers and more about enjoying the simple moments. Emily had never asked for anything in return for the way she had changed his life, but there was something in her, something quiet and unspoken that made him want to give back. He was no longer the same man who had first walked into this diner, looking for a distraction. He had learned to slow down, to appreciate life in ways he never thought possible. One evening, as he sat at his usual table, Emily brought him his coffee. She smiled, but there was something different about the way she looked at him. "You've been quieter than usual," she said, setting the cup down in front of him. Alexander looked up, surprised by her observation. "I've just been thinking," he said slowly. "About everything." "What about everything?" she asked, taking a seat across from him, her expression open, waiting for him to continue. Alexander hesitated, unsure of how to put his thoughts into words. "I've been thinking about how much I used to chase success. I thought if I had everything, the money, the power, I'd be happy. But it never worked. And now, I see that happiness isn't about those things. It's about being content, being at peace." Emily nodded, her gaze soft. "It's a hard lesson to learn," she said quietly. "But I think you're getting it." Alexander smiled, a real smile, one that felt natural on his face. "It doesn't come easy," he admitted. "But I'm getting there." There was a long pause between them, a comfortable silence that didn't feel awkward, but instead felt like the beginning of something new. Alexander realized, in that moment, that he didn't need to have everything figured out. He didn't need to be perfect. All he needed was to keep moving forward, one step at a time. "I've spent so many years trying to get ahead, trying to win," he said, his voice thoughtful. "But I think I've been looking in the wrong direction. I've been so focused on the end goal that I've missed everything along the way." Emily smiled, her eyes bright with understanding. "It's easy to do that," she said, "especially when you're used to winning, used to always being the one who comes out on top. But real life isn't a competition. It's about living in the moment, appreciating the journey, and the people you meet along the way." Alexander nodded, absorbing her words. He had spent so many years building walls around himself, walls that kept people at a distance. But now, he realized, those walls were nothing more than barriers that prevented him from truly living. "I used to think that success was about achieving more, doing more," he said softly. "But now, I think it's about being present, about connecting with people, about making a difference in the small moments." Emily's smile widened. "I think you're starting to see the bigger picture," she said. "You're not just a man with power anymore. You're someone who understands what it means to truly live." Alexander felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. He didn't know where this new path would take him, but for the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid of the unknown. He was ready to face it, to embrace it. He wasn't alone anymore. He had Emily, and the lessons she had taught him. And that was enough. "Thank you," he said quietly, looking into her eyes. "For everything." Emily didn't say anything at first. She just nodded, as if acknowledging something they both knew. "It's been a pleasure," she said softly, her voice warm. "But you've done all the hard work. I'm just glad I could be here to see it." Alexander smiled, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. He had spent so long focused on the wrong things, but now, he was ready to live the life he had always wanted. A life of connection, of purpose, and of peace. As he left the diner that evening, he felt something shift inside him. He wasn't sure where the road ahead would take him, but for the first time in years, he was excited to find out. He was no longer defined by his past, but by the person he was becoming. And he knew that whatever came next, he was ready for it. The weeks that followed brought even more change for Alexander. He found himself reflecting on his past more than ever, not with regret, but with a sense of understanding. He had been living his life in pursuit of external validation, thinking that success was measured by what he owned, how much he made, and who he knew. But now, he understood that success wasn't about the accumulation of wealth or power. It was about the quality of the connections you made and the way you impacted the world around you. Emily had given him a perspective he never could have found on his own. Her quiet strength, her self-assurance, her unwavering kindness. All of it had opened his eyes to the possibility of a life that wasn't driven by ambition alone. He found himself spending more time with her, not just in the diner, but outside of it too. They would talk for hours, sharing their stories, their dreams, their fears. Emily had shown him that it was okay to be vulnerable, to admit when you didn't have all the answers, and to trust others with your truth. One evening, as they sat together after the diner had quieted down, Alexander finally said what had been on his mind for a while. I've been thinking about making some changes in my life, he said, his voice soft but steady. Not just in business, but in how I live, how I show up in the world. I want to make a real impact. I want to do things that matter. Emily smiled at him, her eyes warm and understanding. You already are, she said simply. Alexander shook his head, feeling the weight of his words. No, I mean really matter. I want to give back, not just with money, but with my time, my energy. I want to help people, like you've helped me. Emily didn't respond right away, but the look in her eyes told him everything he needed to know. She understood. She had always understood. It's a big step, she said after a pause, but it's the right one. You don't have to do it alone, you know. There are people out there who need what you have to offer. Alexander nodded. He had spent so long focusing on himself, on his empire, that he had forgotten the power of collective action, of community. I've been so focused on building something for myself that I forgot what it meant to build something for others, he admitted. But now I see it. I see how much I have to give, and I don't want to waste it anymore. Emily's smile grew even brighter, and for the first time, Alexander felt like he was truly living up to his potential. Not in terms of wealth or status, but in terms of how he could contribute to the world around him. It wasn't an easy journey, and he knew there would be challenges ahead, but he felt ready to take the next step. With Emily by his side, he felt more grounded, more certain of the path he was on. And as they sat together in the quiet diner, he realized that this was exactly where he was meant to be. Not in some high-rise office, not in some boardroom filled with deal-makers, but here, in this simple, humble space, with a woman who had shown him the true meaning of success. In the weeks that followed, Alexander took action. He started small, volunteering at local charities, offering his expertise to those who needed it most. But it wasn't just about charity. It was about connection, about building relationships with people from all walks of life. He didn't need to be a billionaire to make a difference. He just needed to be present, to show up, and to do what he could. And as he continued down this new path, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Real peace. The kind that comes from knowing you're on the right path. The kind that comes from giving without expecting anything in return. Alexander knew his journey wasn't over, but he also knew that he was exactly where he needed to be. For the first time, he was living with intention, living for something bigger than himself. And he had Emily to thank for that. She had opened his eyes to a world he had never seen, a world where success wasn't defined by what you could acquire, but by what you could give. And for that, he would be forever grateful. Months passed, and Alexander found himself deeper into the life he had never expected. His focus had shifted from the cold calculations of business to something far more meaningful. He had built relationships with people from all walks of life, and each interaction felt more fulfilling than any business deal he had ever closed. Emily had become not just a part of his routine, but a source of constant inspiration. She never asked for anything from him, yet she had given him so much. As the days went by, he started to see the world differently. It wasn't just about getting ahead or being at the top anymore. It was about making an impact, no matter how small. He still managed his business empire, but now there was a sense of balance. Alexander had found a way to combine his passion for success with his desire to live a life of purpose. Emily, as always, stood quietly in the background, offering encouragement when needed, but never pushing him. It was in the small moments that she made the biggest impact, the quiet talks over coffee, the advice she never forced upon him, but that he had come to rely on. One afternoon, Alexander was sitting in his office, going over some paperwork. It had been a productive day, and as usual, he was feeling the weight of the responsibilities he carried. His phone buzzed, and when he checked it, he saw a message from Emily. "I've been thinking, maybe it's time we did something bigger together." The message was simple, but it stopped him in his tracks. He had spent so much time focusing on his own path that he had never really stopped to think about what they could do together. Emily had been a guiding light in his life, but perhaps there was something more they could create, something beyond just the lessons she had taught him. That evening, when he met her at the diner, he couldn't contain his excitement. "I got your message," he said, leaning forward on the table. "What did you mean by that? Something bigger together?" Emily smiled, the kind of smile that always made Alexander feel like he was seeing her for the first time. "I've been thinking," she said slowly, her voice steady but with a hint of something he couldn't quite place. You've spent so much of your life helping businesses grow, building empires. But what if you could help people grow? What if you could make a real difference? Not just with money, but by teaching others how to find their purpose. Alexander's heart skipped a beat. You want me to help people? He asked, the idea both exciting and intimidating at the same time. Emily nodded. Yes, you've learned so much, not just about business, but about life. You've found a way to live with purpose, to connect with others. That's something a lot of people are missing. I think it's time you shared that with the world. The idea took root in his mind, and as he thought about it more, he realized she was right. He had been given the tools to succeed, but now, he was in a position to help others find success. Success not just in their careers, but in their lives. Alexander spent the next few weeks planning. He didn't want to rush into it. This was something important, something he wanted to get right. He decided to create a foundation, one that would help young entrepreneurs find their purpose and build businesses that aligned with their values, not just their profits. It would be a place where people could come together, share ideas, and support each other in their journeys. He wanted to give back, but more than that, he wanted to help others live a life that was true to who they were. Emily, as always, was by his side, offering quiet support. She didn't need to say much. Her belief in him was enough. She had been there from the beginning, guiding him with her words and actions, showing him what it meant to truly live. As the foundation took shape, Alexander couldn't help but feel a sense of fulfillment he had never experienced before. This was different from anything he had done in his business career. This wasn't about making money or gaining power. This was about helping others, about creating something that would outlast him. And as he looked across the table at Emily, he knew he had found his true calling. He wasn't just building an empire anymore. He was building something that mattered, something that would make a difference long after he was gone.